Well, March Madness just happened, and it was kind of exciting to see the tournament. Not as many upsets as we've seen in years past, but it means some of the top teams made it all the way to the finish for some great final matchups. And this whole culture around brackets and betting in general got us thinking a little bit about some of the parallels and the lessons that can be learned from kind of betting in the sports world and filling out your brackets to the financial landscape. And we've got some really good takeaways for you on today's episode. So I'm going to grab Ryan. We're going to talk a little bit of sports up his alley as well as finances. So should be a fun collision today. Let's get to it. It's another episode of The Pilot's Advisor. Walter Stroholt alongside the Pilot's Advisor himself, Ryan Fleming. Ryan, how's it going?
Doing wonderful, Walter. And I hear we're talking about March Madness today, so I'm excited.
Yeah. Now, I know we're releasing this episode post-tournament. We're recording it, though, right as the Final Four is getting ready to start. So I'm curious, did you have all these one seeds making it to the championship game and into the Final Four, or were you picking upsets everywhere?
Well, just like stock picking, it's a loser's game. I tend to donate money every single year.
Yes.
But historically, you have to pick a bunch of upsets or you're going to have no chance at winning a bracket. And I think it's funny the people that are touting this year like, hey, I did great. Well, that's because all the number one teams are in the Final Four this year. So
that's right. Yeah. All the people that just picked the favorites did really well this year.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't even know when the last time it happened where all four teams were number one seeds. Do you know?
Yeah, I did see a stat on that. I think it was like 2008. I think was the last time that we had the all one seed Final Four. So it's only happened one other time. So it was a little bit unique, believe it or not, kind of unique to have all the top guys make it to the finish. So.
Yeah, the top seeded ones, which, like I said, I know that hasn't happened very often, let alone, like you talked about, not having massive upsets and that Cinderella team per se. And not, like I said, I donate money every year, but my bracket blew up earlier this year than it did because those few upsets that I did pick just didn't happen, and I had those teams going on for a little while.
Yep. I've got, I did okay, and I've got the chance to maybe, I think, get a top three finish if things break my way, but doesn't matter. If you're not first, you're last, I think is the old Ricky Bobby saying. So, and I don't think I can win mathematically first. So,
well, and I wager a massive amount of money. I always laugh when I talk to prospects and they're like, well, I'm playing with some money over here. And I go, well, I don't play with any of my money or saving for retirement. Obviously, I very much care about investing and know the power of it, know the power of compounding interest and all that. So my wager on the tournament this year was $25.
25. Okay. Nice.
So I've been crying myself to sleep, the last week and a half once I knew that money was probably gone.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you just enjoy the tournament then for what it is once you've kind of been eliminated from it, which I've known a few people now that don't do brackets anymore because they found that it was ruining their experience of the tournament. And instead they enjoy just watching the games without having, a bracket riding on it. So that's another approach.
I think it's more fun. I think then you have at least something to watch or maybe root for a team that you wouldn't have rooted for.
It makes me care about some of the games.
Yeah. So. Well, and I think unfortunately that's why people gamble with sports anyways, because whether they care or not, once they have money on it, then they have more of a reason to watch. But
yeah,
it's amazing how, I have a 12-year-old son and he asked me some questions now like, hey, Dad, who are we rooting for today? If there's a team up there and it's funny more and more as I don't know if this is as I age or as I get older, I'll have certain reasons to root for one team or over the other, but really I just want to watch a good game. I don't want to watch a blowout. I want to watch a game that it's coming down in the final couple minutes and you're sitting on the edge of your seat and go, oh, that was just an awesome, Sweet 16 game or what have you.
Maybe it is something with getting older, but I'm a little less passionate about the especially the random, oh, I want this team to win because it's just give me a good game and I really don't care who wins. And that's maybe it is something about getting older that lets you accept that. I don't know. Piece of the equation.
It's also, and I apologize to our listeners that want to hear all about the market, but I just think this is a great sports conversation in general. But as I've gotten older, I realized that my relationship with certain teams was unhealthy. I was born in Columbus, Ohio, diehard Ohio State Buckeyes fan, played at, the Air Force Academy. So of course, watched Air Force. And if those teams didn't do well, it ruined my whole week.
Yeah.
And one of the things that has been very healthy for me as I've gotten a little older is we moved right near Clemson University, and so now I watch Clemson and I root for Clemson quite a bit, and it kind of spreads out or diversifies my Saturdays to where I'm not just totally devastated if that one team or that one stock doesn't hit, right? And
Yes, you
so
you become a fan of a couple of different teams, and then at least maybe you hit on a few of them. Yeah,
yeah, so it's diversifying my passion a little bit, so it lessens the blow if one of those teams doesn't show up
yeah.
or loses that Saturday.
I wonder if that's why people have also become fans of players more. Because I don't remember back in the day being a fan of a particular player so much. It was about the team as always. But I feel, and I don't know if this was maybe LeBron was the first that I feel like people were going to be fans of LeBron no matter where he played, and they were going to get his jersey and be a LeBron fan. So even if the Cavs lost back in the day, or the Heat, or now the Lakers, like if LeBron has a good game, the LeBron fans are like, what a great day. Who
Yeah,
cares about the
yeah,
result?
and that is a new thing. It's funny. I've heard that a lot. I think it's been more prevalent in basketball for years. That you
Yeah.
mentioned the NBA, and I could see that, but I've seen it pop up a lot more in football now, where
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, you're a Bengals fan," and no, I'm actually just a Joe Burrow fan,
Yes,
and I'm like,
yes.
"What?
Uh-huh. Maybe
You can do that?"
fantasy football might have a little bit of something to do with that. Like speaking of gambling and kind of picking winners and things
Yeah.
like that,
Yep.
that's obviously had a big impact where you're rooting for particular players to do something versus a team. So
Well,
I don't
like
know.
I normally do, I know, Walter, I have you totally sidetracked from what we were going to talk about on this podcast, but I'm sure our listeners, if they are sports fans, are really enjoying it. So anyway, you got to
They
get us back
probably
on track.
are. They probably are. Well, let me throw out some stats, and we'll get we'll start dovetailing these two things together a little bit more. There was almost $3 billion wagered back in 2024 on March Madness. I'm sure when we get the final numbers for 2025, I'm just going to guess we'll be past the 3 billion mark, given the continued rise of gambling and the opportunity that's out there to do those kinds of things. Interestingly, though, the stats. No one's ever gotten a perfect bracket. You can never, like, I think it was Warren Buffett was like, I'll give $1 billion to somebody who can get a perfect bracket. And it got like free publicity for them. And he knew that he would never have to pay that out because it's basically impossible for somebody to,
And
to get
that's
that.
only 64 teams.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Imagine doing that with stocks where there's like
So,
what 30,000 or something.
So that's a great way to look at it. Is how are you then supposed to always pick winners when it comes to your stock portfolio? And keep in mind that you're entering into that pool with a whole bunch of other people making their picks. The chances of you coming out ahead and being that one left standing at the end of it is just incredibly small. So we kind of paired this with an article that we found, and it was based on some findings from an economist, Hendrik Bessembinder, I believe is the pronunciation of the last name. He closely analyzed the returns of those almost 30,000 publicly traded listed common stocks from the period of 1926 to 2023 is when the study stopped. And what we want to do is compare what he found to some March Madness and betting takeaways and see if, there's any parallels we can draw between the two. And this is one of the really interesting ones was that, many people guess the winners, but the majority end up losing money in March Madness. Since that just happened recently, there's a 1 in 120 billion chance of getting that perfect bracket. Your chances are better of winning your individual, maybe office pool, but still not very great. And Hendrick's study was interesting, Ryan, because it showed that most stocks led to reduced rather than increased shareholder wealth during that study period. And it's interesting because that's contrary to what the market as a whole has done, but individual stock picking has often left people with less money than more money.
Yeah, I see it all the time. The people that fool around and stock pick, they have far less money and their returns are much less than those that have a, very diversified plan. And I hate when people say the market because I go, what are we talking about? The S&P, we talking about the NASDAQ, we talk, Russell, 2000, 3000. What are we talking about? What is the market? But, I do watch Dalbar and all their studies and their data because, the average investor takes home less than 4%. And
Mm.
that's just horrible. And when they look at that, why investors do so poorly, exactly like we're talking about, it's because they're stock picking, they're market timing, their track record investing. They're not being long term. They're being they're being emotional. They're making those short term emotional decisions. And I look at returns of the average investor out there with 4%, that's a loss. You are losing, probably not even keeping up with inflation, and it's sad.
In this study period, only 31 stocks of the 29,000 plus that were in the database for the entire 98 period, only 31 stayed in there. So you had 29,000 companies essentially fail during that time period. Now, I realize we're looking at a long time period there, Ryan, but still, it's a great lesson in that, the stock that you're thinking is the winner today may not even be around X amount of years from now. And so there should be a lot of caution given those failure rates of all those companies.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how big the company or how good the company is. I mean, Apple almost failed multiple times.
Yeah,
What's happened to GE and Boeing, I don't think anybody could have predicted.
right.
With the
I mean,
downfall there, and that could be
do,
half their portfolio.
do you think Apple and Google and some of these major companies, even Nvidia and some of these, do we think that they'll be in existence in, I don't know, 50 years, 100 years?
Well, I
You
don't
might
think.
say, yeah, but the probabilities are kind of against them, aren't they?
Well, it takes one bit of legislation, and we're watching it right now with these tariffs, where it could really cripple a company. You
Hmm.
put a 50% tariff on, and suddenly Nvidia, if you're looking at it just being in some overseas country. Now, granted, I mean, I think it's going to get a lot of them to put some roots here on American soil, which is the whole reason. But one bit of legislation, or with Boeing, one big screw up could cripple the whole company. And
Yeah,
so you don't want a leveraged portion of your retirement assets in one company like that. And I see it all the time, and it's really, really good until it's not. You know,
yeah.
you had talked about sustainable success, and when we were looking at the tournament, I know that there was I think it was like 4 teams that have been in the tournament half the years. What were those 4 teams again?
Yeah, so since the tournament began in 1939, only 5 schools have made tournament appearances in more than half. So most schools have not even appeared in the tournament half the time.
And if I was guessing,
Yes,
I'm just trying to think of the teams that are always there, and of
the
course, I
blue
would think
bloods.
the Duke, the North Carolina, but I wouldn't know beyond that.
Yeah, Duke and Carolina definitely in there. Kansas is on the list. UCLA obviously had some incredible runs over the years, so they've made it to more than half. And Kentucky, so the true blue bloods have been able to make it. But even when you look at it from that standpoint, Ryan, like we're still talking like a 50-50 chance that they're making the tournament over that period of time, which
Well, not,
isn't
what I
even
wanted
great
to
for the
bring
best
up
of the
with that,
best.
yeah, well, not just that they've been in the tournament half the time, but when they start talking about consistency of making the tournament, when I was growing up in Cincinnati, the Kentucky Wildcats were, off the charts. I mean, what a
Yeah,
powerhouse! And that was back when Patino was there, and but we were looking at just. I think Tom Izzo might have the biggest runs where Michigan State's been in the tournament for an X number of years in a row.
yeah,
But what was crazy when I started looking at some of those stats is those big names like Kentucky, North Carolina, they've been down and didn't even make the tournament a few of these years. And, that's crazy to me.
yep.
So it doesn't matter how good that stock is or how big that name is of that stock. I mean, you could have some down years where it really, really crushes your overall portfolio.
Yeah, 1 or 2 bad years of recruiting, and you're rebuilding what feels like almost from scratch. Carolina was the last team in to this year's tournament. Lot of discussion of whether they deserved to be in or not. So that was kind of interesting to see play out. This is the issue often when it comes to filling out our brackets, Ryan. I knew Carolina wasn't that good this year, last team into the tournament, but
Oh, emotions. You got some ties there, don't you?
it's where I went to school. I worked for the university. I worked for the women's basketball team for 7 seasons as their play-by-play guy. I covered the men's basketball team during some of their best seasons when I was a journalist in the local community, and so I've got emotional tie-ins there. I'm not going to not pick them to go far and likely win the tournament almost every single year, no matter how bad they've been. And that usually that is bad to do and blows up your bracket, as it did this year for me. And so picking your favorite team is not a very good decision when it comes to the brackets, yet we can't help it. I bet you see people doing that pretty much the same with stocks, just picking maybe what
It
we're
is
familiar in or what
amazing
we
to
like.
me,
Yeah,
how emotionally attached people get to certain stocks. I mean, they get emotionally attached, and it's almost like they're a family member. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, and I get it. I mean, Clemson went to the Elite Eight last year, and I'm like, well, of course they're going to make a nice tournament run this year. They beat Duke, they beat Kentucky,
Yeah,
they
good
beat North
record.
Carolina all in the regular season. They're obviously going to make a run. And I don't even want to bring up the team that they lost to. I think they had like 22 turnovers. I mean, it was the ugliest game I've ever watched.
Yep.
So just like you're talking about, where you make emotional play, well, my bracket blew up on day one.
Yeah. And why do people do that with stocks? Is it usually some familial thing like dad loved this stock, so I'm going to keep investing in it? Or is it more like they have a cool logo? Like people pick their sports team sometimes, right? Because, I like their
Yeah, the
logo or like
uniforms
their
are
team
great.
name. Or like my mom used to pick all of her favorite football teams. She would always, when we would do like family football pools, she would pick, she's going to kill me for saying this on the air, but she would say, which coach has the cutest butt?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that, but yeah, with stocks,
Sorry, mom.
it's kind of crazy. I mean, I see a lot of different, like a lot of big mistakes, to be honest with you. My father-in-law, he worked for GE for 30 years. All his money was in GE stock, and it had been great until, he lost 60% of all his money. And I had told him to, change his ways years before it actually happened. Or I'll see Delta pilots, they'll buy a bunch of Delta stock. FedEx pilots buying a bunch of FedEx stock. I think it's becoming less prevalent now to buy stock of the company you're with, because very few companies are actually giving you that discount to buy their stock now. It made a lot of sense if you got a 10%, 15% discount. But if there's no discount, why would you buy something that your whole life is already tied to? One of the other ones, I'm just trying to answer your question, like what do you see emotionally?
Yeah.
Another one is, hey, dad bought me this Coca-Cola stock back in, whatever year it was, and they've owned it for the last 30 years. Yeah, obviously that there's a problem with that. You have a massive capital gain to handle at some point, and you're not diversified at all. But I see it all the time.
Attention aviators, when you've spent years in the cockpit managing the complexities of flight, isn't it time you navigated your retirement with the same precision? Introducing retirepilots.com. Right at your touchdown zone on our homepage, there's a beacon flashing, "Get my free toolkit." Click that and you'll be cleared for a direct route to Ryan's retirement toolkit, tailor-made for pilots like you. Inside, you'll find two of his important works, The Pilot's Advisor and Pilots Retire Early. Between these two books, you can decipher the 9 critical decisions when retiring before 65 and discover the 7 lessons to help pilots land safely in retirement. But that's not all. This toolkit is packed with altitude-high value, including extras to get your retirement plans off the runway and light the afterburners on your 401k. Vector on over to retirepilots.com to grab your toolkit, and let's embark on this journey together. Yeah. I thought there was an interesting takeaway from Hendrick's study here. He said that this was sort of his conclusion of the study, that investors often overestimate the worth of their information and they confuse the familiar with the safe. They have the illusion of being in control. And that one hit deep, because I think that one makes a lot of sense. Like there could be wisdom, I would imagine, in I don't know, when I watch the Shark Tank, right, and see those guys making investments. These are obviously pretty smart folks, good business people, and I'm always intrigued when I hear one of them say, I don't know this space, and I only invest in things that I'm familiar with. And I always found that somewhat, like, there's logic to that, but also seems sort of strange because you're limiting your options, and it keeps you from maybe diversifying into new areas. And I realize stocks and investing in businesses are two different things, but it's kind of interesting to hear them say things like that and then read this takeaway from Hendrick.
Well, and I even look back on my experience being in this industry. I mean, I've been an advisor since '08, been watching it and wanting to learn about it my whole life. But if I was a stock picker, I'd probably be pretty bad at it, to be honest with you. And I look at some of these stats where almost 52% of the companies had negative cumulative returns. So you have I look at that as like you have a 50% chance, if you're stock picking, of having negative returns over that whole time period.
Yeah.
that screams to me diversification. When you
Yeah.
diversify, those market returns on average, should be, 7 to 10%. But if you're stock picking, you have a 51% chance of picking something that's going to be negative that whole time period. I'd be running for the hills.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not a fun prospect. I mean, those are not odds that I want to be, essentially we're talking about gambling with your money at that standpoint. That's like picking sports gambling, a 50-50 pick for who's going to win the game. I don't want to do that with my money I'm planning to retire on.
100%. You actually bring up the great lesson here. What's the lesson? I mean, it's fun to do the March Madness brackets. It's fun to, watch those games, but you shouldn't mix that with investing. That's not a good comprehensive investment strategy for your retirement assets. We want to be unemotional. We want to be very, very diversified, and we need to have an unemotional system helping us through the ups and downs in the market and all the turbulence that we're going to face.
It's a great point, Ryan. It's really helpful to take that perspective. And let me tell you what, folks, if you like data, if you like stats, kind of like some of the things we were throwing out on today's show, then definitely pick up Ryan's toolkit. It's going to help you prepare for retirement. You can get it for free. It's going to be packed with both of Ryan's books, Pilots Retire Early and the original Pilots Advisor book. It'll help you light the afterburners on your 401k, specific information for pilots, lots of data-driven research in the guides and in some of the information and in those books especially that's going to come along with the toolkit. So if you're looking for a foundation, if you're looking for a great starting point for when it comes to your finances for retirement planning, pick up the toolkit today. You can get it for free right now. Just check the link in the description of today's show or go to retirepilots.com and you can get more great information like we talked about today. Maybe a little less sports talk in that information, Ryan, but some good stats, data, and helpful information nonetheless. Ryan, thanks for all your help today. This was a fun chat about March Madness. I know we both had our brackets pretty much blown up, but it was still fun to talk about. And hey, there's always next year, right?
Always next year. And I don't think too many of our listeners would be upset. Most pilots, or a lot of pilots, are sports fans too. And I thought it was a fun episode.
Yeah, it was good stuff. We'll see everybody next time right back here on the Pilot's Advisor.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.